I woke up at 5 in the morning and lay staring at the ceiling for a long time. The sun was slowly creeping into the room through the gap between the curtains, which I hadn't changed since Edsel's death. They were still as faded as ever, with barely discernible patterns. Edsel said he liked the way they dimmed the morning light, and I'm just used to it. Today is Olivia's birthday, my granddaughter. She's turning 12. I picked out a special gift for her, a silver bracelet with a little pendant in the shape of a book. Olivia loves to read, just like I did when I was her age. Maybe that's the only thing we have in common. I don't see much of myself in her, not in looks or mannerisms. Sheila's raising her in her own image. I rose from the bed, wincing at the pain in my knees. The rheumatism had worsened with the arrival of fall. I walked slowly to the bathroom, trying not to look at myself in the mirror. 67 is not an age when you want to face yourself in the morning. The party would be at Sheila and her husband Paxton's house in Northridge. It's almost an hour's drive from my home in San Bernardino, a swanky neighborhood where every house looks like it stepped off the pages of Architectural Digest magazine. When Sheila first met Paxton, she was shy about bringing him to our modest house with cracked plaster and an old garden. And now I feel uncomfortable visiting them, like a misplaced exhibit from a museum of the past. I'd chosen my best dress, a navy blue with a small floral print, and spent more time than usual styling my gray hair. I wanted to look decent. Althea, Paxton's mother, always gave me an appraising glance, as if to see if I was presentable enough to be around her precious son and grandchildren. Wrapping the gift in brightly colored paper, I set off in my old Ford that Edsel had bought back in 2006. The traffic on the highway wasn't as bad as I'd feared, and by 11 o'clock, I was parked outside Sheila's house. Their two-story, white-columned mansion always gave me mixed feelings of admiration and a vague bitterness. Paxton makes a good living at his law firm, but even his income wouldn't be enough for a house like this if it weren't for the generous help of his parents. I rang the doorbell, clutching a gift in a bouquet of flowers. Emma, their housekeeper, a Filipina in her 50s with a polite smile, opened the door. "Good morning, Mrs. Wimbrel," she said, taking my coat. "Everyone is in the parlor." I walked through the spacious hallway, trying to ignore the new works of art Sheila had hung on the walls. Modern paintings that I didn't understand a thing about. There were voices and laughter coming from the living room. Olivia saw me first and ran over to hug me. Despite Sheila's influence, she was still small enough to be genuinely happy to see me. "Grandma!" she exclaimed, hugging me. She smelled of vanilla and some expensive baby perfume. "Happy birthday, dear." I handed her a present. Sheila walked over to us, holding a glass of mimosa. Her hair was in a perfect bun, and she was wearing a dress that I'm sure cost like 3 of my pensions. "Mom, you're early," she said instead of greeting me. "We were expecting you by noon." "I was afraid I'd be late because of the traffic," I replied, trying not to show how hurt I was by the lack of a warm greeting. "Well, while you're here, Emma, get Mom something to drink." At that moment, Althea Crosby, Paxton's mother, entered the living room, an elegant woman of 68, with flawless platinum blonde hair and impeccable makeup. She wore a pearl necklace around her neck and diamond earrings in her ears. She gave me a slight nod. "Maris, glad to see you could make it." No hugs, no warm words, just a statement of fact. I was used to being treated that way in the years I'd known her. Althea had always made it clear that I, a mere postal clerk, wasn't good enough for her social circle. Olivia, meanwhile, unwrapped my gift and gasped in delight. "Grandma, it's beautiful. Look, Mommy, there's a little book that opens." Sheila caught a glimpse of the bracelet and smiled strainedly. "That's very nice, Mother," she said in a tone that made it clear she didn't like the gift. Paxton, my son-in-law, a tall man with a budding bald spot, came over to say hello. He was always polite to me, but distant as if I were a distant relative, not his wife's mother. "How are you, Maris? How's your house? Does it need any repairs?" "Thank you, Paxton. It's fine," I replied, though in truth the roof was leaking and the plumbing needed replacing. But I didn't want to look needy. Not here, not in front of them. By 1 o'clock, other guests had begun to gather. Olivia's classmates, several married couples who were friends of Sheila and Paxton, and my son Corbin and his wife Veronica. They were the last to arrive, and I noticed Sheila roll her eyes when she saw them. Corbin, as always, looked like he'd just stepped out of the salon, perfectly styled hair, designer shirt, expensive watch. He walked over to me, gave me a brief hug, and immediately pulled away when he saw one of Paxton's business associates. I was left standing in the corner of the living room watching everyone socialize. Sheila fluttered from one guest to another, laughing and chatting. She always knew how to be the soul of the community. Her life with Paxton and his family had taught her that. I was always more of a listener than a storyteller. After dinner, it was time for presents. Olivia sat in the center of the living room, surrounded by boxes of various sizes. She opened them one by one: a new tablet from her parents, a designer backpack from Corbin and Veronica, a certificate for a horseback ride from her friends. Then Sheila pulled out a small velvet box. "This one is special," she said, looking at Althea. "It's from Daddy and me for Althea's grandmother." I blinked in surprise. A present for Althea at Olivia's birthday party? That was odd, but I remained silent. Althea opened the box and pulled out a dainty sapphire necklace. The blue stones sparkled in the light of the chandelier. "Oh, Sheila Paxton, it's amazing," Althea said, a look of genuine delight on her usually unruffled face. "Sapphires are your favorite," Sheila said as she helped her mother-in-law put on the necklace. "And they match your eyes perfectly." I watched this scene with growing bewilderment. In all my years, Sheila had never given me anything like this. They were usually impersonal gift certificates or last-minute cosmetic sets. "What a beautiful necklace," I said, unable to resist. "It must have cost a fortune." There was an awkward pause. Sheila gave me an annoyed look. "Mom, money isn't everything," she said. "I just thought it was pretty," I tried to defend myself. Sheila leaned toward me and said quietly but clearly, "You're just jealous. But these things aren't for you. You're not worthy of such gifts." Her words hit me like a slap. I felt the color flood my face. The room was suddenly quiet, and I realized that several people had heard the phrase. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, and hurried out of the room, heading toward the bathroom. As I closed the door behind me, I leaned against the sink and took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. The mirror reflected my flushed face and eyes full of pain. How could she say such a thing? Am I, her mother, unworthy of a good gift? I stood there, remembering how it all started. Sheila was born when I was 25. Edsel was 27. We were young, full of hope and love. She was such a happy child, with bright eyes and an infectious laugh. I remember her running around the yard of our first little house, catching butterflies and picking flowers. I remember reading her bedtime stories, braiding her pigtails before school. When she was 10, Corbin was born. Sheila was so proud to babysit her brother, helping me change his diapers and sing lullabies to him. She was my little helper, my pride. What happened to that little girl? When did she turn into this cold, calculating woman for whom material values mean more than family ties? The change began gradually when she went to college. She studied finance and began socializing with kids from wealthy families. I saw her shy away from Edsel and me when we came to visit her. My old-fashioned clothes, Edsel's simple mannerisms, our inexpensive car. She came home less often on weekends, and when she did, she spent all her time on the phone, texting with friends. Then she met Paxton Crosby at some student event. He was from a wealthy family. His father owned a large construction company, and his mother, Althea, was a real estate developer. Paxton charmed Sheila with his confidence, his education, and of course the prospects that marriage to him promised. When she brought him to our house for dinner, I saw him looking around the house, not with open contempt, but with a subtle condescension that I had learned to recognize from years of working in the post office, serving customers from all walks of life. After their marriage, Sheila began to adopt more and more of the Crosby family mannerisms. She changed her closet, her hair, even her accent. She started going to the same beauty parlors as Althea, joined the same country club. And gradually, she began to look at me through Althea's eyes as a simple woman who lacked sophistication and class. Perhaps it was my own fault. I never aspired to luxury, content with our modest life with Edsel. We both worked hard to educate our children, but were unable to pass on an inheritance or connections in high society. All we had was love and care. But it seems that wasn't enough. When Edsel passed away from a heart attack 3 years ago, I expected the grief to bring the children and me closer together. Instead, they became even more distant. Sheila and Corbin organized the funeral without consulting me, picked out an expensive casket and wreaths, and then sent me part of the bill. It was as if I wasn't a widow, just a relative to share the expenses with. When Edsel died, I was left with a villa in San Bernardino, an old but spacious house with a garden that we had bought 20 years ago with all our savings and a mortgage. We finally paid it off a year before Edsel died. He'd been so proud of the accomplishment that he'd thrown a little party, which Sheila hadn't come to, saying she was busy. I wiped away my tears and looked at the clock. I'd been in the bathroom for almost 15 minutes. I had to get back to my guests or my absence would become even more noticeable. As I left the bathroom, I heard laughter coming from the living room. When I got back there, I saw that the party was going on as if nothing had happened. Olivia was playing with the other children, the adults talking in small groups. Sheila was standing next to Althea, and they were both admiring the new necklace. No one noticed my return, and I sat quietly in a chair in the corner of the room. After a while, Emma brought out the cake, a three-tiered confectionery marvel with fondant figures and 12 candles. Everyone sang happy birthday, and I sang along, trying not to think about Sheila's words. After the cake, the guests started to leave. I, too, was about to leave, realizing that my presence would only mar my daughter's celebration. "Are you leaving already?" Sheila asked as I looked for my bag. There was no regret in her voice, but rather relief. "Yes, I have to go." "Thanks for the party," I replied formally. "Olivia liked your gift," she said, and it was probably the only sincere thing we'd said in the whole conversation. "I'm glad. Tell her I love her." Sheila nodded, but said nothing about our previous conversation. No apology, no admission that her words had been cruel. I realized she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. On the drive home, I thought about how much our relationship had changed. I had once been a whole world to her, a mom who could comfort, protect, teach. Now I was just an inconvenient reminder of a past she wanted to forget. Back home, I walked slowly through the empty rooms. Without Edsel, the villa seemed too big, too quiet. There were pictures on the mantelpiece, Sheila and Corbin as children, our wedding to Edsel, Olivia's first day of school. I picked up a picture of Sheila and me at the beach. She was about 8, smiling into the camera, snuggled up to me. I remembered that day, how we built sandcastles, how she squealed with delight as the waves lapped at our feet. "You're not worthy of such gifts." Those words kept echoing in my head, hurting every time I remembered them. Was I worthy? After all the years I had dedicated to my children, after all the sacrifices I had made for their well-being? I put the picture back on the shelf and went into the kitchen to make myself some tea. The house creaked and groaned like an old man with arthritis. How many more years would I live here alone, clinging to memories of better times? And what will happen when I'm too old or sick to take care of myself? Will Sheila and Corbin take care of me, or will I end up in a nursing home, left to fend for myself? For the first time, I let myself think that maybe I shouldn't stay in this big house full of ghosts of the past. Maybe it was time to make a change in my life while I still had the strength and opportunity. After Olivia's birthday, I didn't leave the house for days. Sheila's words still echoed in my head like a broken record. "You don't deserve these gifts." Every morning I woke up with that phrase and went to sleep with it. The most frustrating part was that Sheila didn't even call to apologize. Apparently, she didn't think she'd said anything wrong. Today I decided to put the old photo albums in order. In the basement were boxes of family photos that Edsel and I had collected throughout our lives. I hadn't looked in there since his death. It hurt too much to see his smiling face, his kind eyes. Walking down the creaky stairs, I turned on the dim light bulb. The basement was dry but dusty. In the corner were neatly signed boxes labeled in Edsel's handwriting. Weddings, Sheila's childhood, Corbin's childhood, family holidays. Nearby were boxes of toys I'd kept for my grandchildren, though Sheila never let Olivia play with that old stuff. I picked out the box labeled Sheila's school years and carried it into the living room. Settling into a chair with a cup of tea, I opened the lid. The smell of old paper and the slightly noticeable scent of the lavender I had once put in to preserve the photos enveloped me. taking me back in time. Here's Sheila on her first day of school, a 6-year-old girl with 2 pigtails and a gap-toothed smile. I remember ironing her uniform the night before, braiding her hair, trying to make perfect pigtails. She was so excited she barely touched her breakfast. I turned the scrapbook page. Sheila at the school concert wearing a white dress I'd made myself, saving on my own clothes. She played the flute, and though she wasn't the most talented in the band, Edsel and I applauded the loudest. The next picture made me smile. Sheila with a dirty face in the backyard of our old house. She and I were planting tomatoes, and she was digging in the ground so enthusiastically that she got soiled from head to toe. I remember her laughing as I tried to scrub the dirt off her cheeks. When did things change? When did my loving daughter turn into the cold, calculating woman I'd seen at Olivia's birthday party? I closed the album and leaned back in my chair, sinking into my memories. The first signs of change came when Sheila met the Paxton family. I remember their first meeting with Althea and Gregory Crosby, Paxton's parents. It was at a restaurant where we were invited to a family reunion. The restaurant was the kind of restaurant where the menu is priceless and the waiters speak with an accent. I wore my best dress and Edsel wore the only suit he kept for special occasions. We arrived in our old Volkswagen, and I noticed Sheila wrinkle her nose as we pulled up to the restaurant. Althea and Gregory were already waiting at a table, she in a silk suit, he in an impeccably tailored jacket. "Mrs. Wimbrel, Mr. Wimbrel." Althea extended her hand to shake ours without even thinking to hug us. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Please, call me Maris," I said, trying to be friendly. "Of course," she said in a tone that made it clear she wasn't going to call me by my first name. We didn't talk much over dinner. Gregory was asking Edsel about his work at the construction company, and I could see his expression change when Edsel talked about his job as foreman. "And you, Maris, what do you do?" Althea asked, sipping her wine. "I work at the post office," I answered. 25 years now." "How interesting," she said, and something like pity flickered in her eyes. I noticed Sheila fidgeting nervously with her napkin. She barely participated in the conversation, just nodded and smiled, as if she were afraid of saying the wrong thing. When the menu arrived, I was confused by the abundance of French names I couldn't read. "What do you recommend?" I asked the waiter. "The bouillabaisse is excellent," he replied. "Bouillabaisse?" I asked, mispronouncing the word. "It's fish soup, Mom," Sheila hissed, and I saw Althea and Paxton exchange glances. "Oh, I see," I said, feeling silly. "I'll take it then." After dinner, as Edsel and I drove home, I asked him what he thought of Paxton's parents. "Pompous snobs," he grumbled. Especially the mom. Looked at us like we were dirt underfoot. "Edsel, don't exaggerate," I tried to reassure him, though I agreed with him inwardly. "They're just different. They're from a different circle." "Exactly. And they'll never accept us into their circle. I hope Sheila knows what she's getting herself into." But Sheila seemed fascinated by the Crosbys' life. After that meeting, she started talking about them more often, admiring their home, their travels, their connections. She began to change, imperceptibly at first, then more and more. One incident that stands out in my memory is one that happened a month before their wedding. Sheila had brought Paxton over for dinner, and I had made my specialty, the tuna casserole that Sheila had loved as a child. "Mom, you know Paxton doesn't eat canned tuna," she said when she saw the dish. "I told you he's allergic to preservatives." "But you never told me that," I countered, feeling the color flood my face. "I did, you just forgot," she cut me off. Like always. The evening was ruined. Paxton politely declined the casserole, and Sheila picked at her plate as if I'd served her something inedible. After dinner, when Paxton went out for a smoke, Sheila took me aside. "Mom, you could try harder," she hissed. "Althea said you should cook something special for special occasions, not everyday food." "But you always loved this casserole," I replied, confused. "It was when I was a kid." Sheila rolled her eyes. "People change. Althea says a good dinner is filet mignon or lobster, not canned casserole." At that moment, I realized for the first time that my daughter was no longer my daughter. She had become a copy of Althea, echoing her opinions, her tastes, her judgment. After the wedding, Things only got worse. Sheila and Paxton moved into a house bought with the help of Paxton's parents and became part of their world. I saw my daughter less and less often, and when I did, I could feel the growing gap between us. When Olivia was born, I'd hoped motherhood would soften Sheila, give her back something of the girl I'd known. But here too, Althea had the upper hand. She insisted on hiring a nanny for Olivia from day one, even though Sheila could take maternity leave. She picked out clothes for the baby girl, toys, even determined which kindergarten Olivia would go to. Althea says Montessori is the best choice for child development, Sheila told me when I suggested a preschool near my house so I could pick up my granddaughter after work. But it's so far away from you, I countered. And it costs a fortune. Money isn't the most important thing when it comes to a child's development, Sheila said in Althea's tone. Althea said it was a crime to skimp on education, and that was true of everything. Althea says, Althea thinks, Althea recommends. My advice, based on my own experience as a mother, was dismissed as outdated and irrelevant. Corbin, my son, was closer to me at first. He was a mama's boy, always seeking my approval, my support. But after Sheila got married, he started to change too. I noticed how he looked up to his son-in-law, his success, his connections, his lifestyle. Corbin has always been ambitious, but his ambition used to be about achievement, not status. Now he became obsessed with the trappings of success: expensive watches, fancy suits, prestigious clubs. He took a job as a representative of a pharmaceutical company, and his job was to persuade doctors to prescribe his company's drugs. He was moving quickly up the career ladder, but I could see his values changing. He used to talk about wanting to help people. Now he talked about commissions and bonuses. When he met Veronica, a girl from a wealthy family, I realized I had lost him too. Veronica was beautiful, smart, and completely empty inside. She was only interested in trends, statuses, and social media. She looked at me the same way Althea did, with barely concealed contempt. I remember one incident in particular vividly from about 2 years ago. We were gathered for Thanksgiving at Sheila's house. Althea, as usual, was at the head of the table, though traditionally it was my place as the mother of the family. But I was used to such petty humiliations and didn't pay much attention to it. At dinner, the conversation turned to politics, and I expressed my opinion about the new healthcare law based on what I had read in the newspaper. Mom, you're confusing the facts, Sheila interrupted me. Althea, please explain to her how things really are. Althea began to explain politics to me in a condescending tone, as if I were a child who couldn't understand complicated things. I noticed Corbin and Veronica exchanging glances, barely containing their laughter. Mom had always had peculiar views on politics, Corbin said, winking at Paxton. Remember when she voted for that mayoral candidate who was later implicated in a scandal? I voted for him because he promised to improve public transportation, I countered. I had no way of knowing he would be dishonest. That's why it's so important to be an informed voter, Althea interjected. I always do thorough research before I make a decision. Not everyone has time for that, I said. Some of us have to work full time. Oh, of course, Althea said with fake sympathy. It must be so tiring, standing behind the counter all day. Actually, my job involves a lot of things, I started, but Sheila interrupted me. Mom, let's not talk about that right now. You should try this sauce, Althea shared the recipe. I was silent, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Corbin looked down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. He didn't stand up for me, didn't say a word in my defense. After dinner, as we moved into the living room for coffee and dessert, I noticed Olivia looking at my bag with interest. The old but nice leather bag that Edsel had given me for our 20th anniversary. Grandma, why do you have such an old bag? She asked innocently. Althea's mom and grandma always have new bags. Before I could answer, Sheila intervened. Olivia, not everyone can afford nice things. Grandma Maris had a different life. My bag is nice, I argued. It's leather and very sturdy. Your grandfather gave it to me, and I treasure it. But it's not brand name, Veronica said, looking at my bag. Nobody wears those nowadays. I wear things because I like them, and they serve a purpose, not because they're on trend, I said, trying to speak calmly. Typical response from someone who can't afford brand name stuff, Corbin snorted. and everyone but me laughed. I remember sitting there, coffee cup in hand, thinking about my own kids making fun of me. They are making fun of my choices, my values, my life, and they're doing it in front of my granddaughter, teaching her to look down on me. After that Thanksgiving, I saw my children even less often. I called them, offered to meet them, invited them to dinner, but they were always too busy. Sheila was working at the bank. Corbin was traveling for conferences. They always had a reason not to see me. The only person who was still warm to me was Olivia. Sheila had enrolled her in so many activities that she didn't have much free time. Althea says that modern children need to develop in every way, Sheila explained when I offered to take Olivia for the weekend. And then that dress story happened. It was about a year ago when Olivia was preparing for a school concert. Sheila called me in a panic. The dress they'd ordered for the performance hadn't arrived in time, and the concert was in 2 days. "Mom, you can sew," she said. "Could you make something simple for Olivia?" I was so happy to be able to help. I said yes. I spent all my savings, bought beautiful fabric and accessories, and stayed up 2 nights to make a beautiful embroidered dress. I put into it all my love, all the skill accumulated over the years. When I brought it back, Sheila looked at it questioningly. "Mama, it's a little homemade," she said. "I thought you'd do something more modern." "But it's beautiful," I objected. "And I embroidered the notes on it because the concert is musical." "Althea says hand embroidery looks cheap," Sheila said. "Everything is done by machine now." At that moment, Althea entered the room. She looked at the dress with a critical eye. "Sheila, darling, you can't send Olivia on stage in that," she said. "What will the other parents think? That we can't afford to buy the child proper clothes?" "But the dress hasn't arrived and the concert is tomorrow," Sheila reminded her. "I've already solved that problem," Althea said. "I called the boutique and they've put aside a beautiful designer dress for us. We can pick it up today." Sheila exhaled with relief. "Thank you, Althea. You saved the situation." They both turned to me with fake smiles. "Thanks for trying, Mom," Sheila said. "Maybe Olivia can wear that dress at home when she plays." I left there with a heavy heart, holding the dress I'd put so much labor and love into. At home, I hung it carefully in my closet, thinking that maybe Olivia would appreciate it someday. But in the back of my mind, I knew that would never happen. Sheila and Althea would make sure my granddaughter would grow up with the same values as they did, where brand mattered, not feelings, status, not connection. As I sit in my living room now with a photo album in my lap, I realize that I have finally lost my children. They grew up, became successful by the standards of society, but lost something important: the ability to appreciate simple things, to see beauty in the ordinary, to respect labor and sincerity. They became exact copies of Althea and her world. A world where a person's worth is determined by the brand of his clothes, the address of his house, his social circle. A world where there is no place for an old woman with calloused hands and simple manners. You're not worthy of such gifts. Maybe Sheila's right. I'm not worthy of a sapphire necklace, not worthy of their glamorous lives, their ostentatious glitz. But am I not worthy of respect? Am I not worthy of the love of my children whom I raised, sacrificing everything? I closed the album and put it back in the box. It was time to stop dwelling on the past, time to face the truth. My children had changed, and no pictures, no memories would bring them back the way they used to be. I needed to decide what to do with my life next, how to live with this pain and disappointment. The invitation to the family dinner came unexpectedly. Usually Sheila would call weeks in advance to tell me to not plan anything for this date, as if I had social events lined up on my calendar. But this time, she called just 2 days in advance. "Mom, Paxton and I are having a little dinner this Friday," she said in that special tone of voice she used for business conversations. "Nothing fancy, just family and a couple of Paxton's coworkers. Can you come?" I suspected there was something behind this sudden invitation, but I said yes. After all, I hadn't seen my granddaughter in almost a month. Friday night was rainy. I was worried I'd be late. Traffic in the rain in San Bernardino is a nightmare. But I was lucky. I arrived exactly at 7 o'clock, just like the invitation said. Paxton opened the door with a strained smile and a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Maris, come in," he said, ushering me inside. "Everyone's already here." 10 people were gathered in the living room. I noticed Althea sitting in a chair by the fireplace as if on a throne. Corbin and Veronica were standing nearby, both with glasses of champagne. Sheila was talking to two men in business suits, apparently Paxton's co-workers. Olivia was nowhere to be seen. "Where's Olivia?" I asked, looking around. "She's at a friend's sleepover," Sheila said, coming toward me. "It's a grown-up dinner, Mom." I felt a pang of disappointment. So I wasn't here for my granddaughter. But then what was it for? Sheila introduced me to Paxton's co-workers Jeremy Holt and Brian Foster, partners in his law firm. They nodded politely, but their eyes immediately returned to Sheila, who looked stunning in a dark red dress that emphasized her figure. "Mom, get something to drink," Sheila said, pointing to the bar. "Paxton can make you a cocktail." "Thanks, but I'm driving. How about just water?" Sheila wrinkled her nose as if I'd said something inappropriate. "Mom, you could call a cab home, or you could stay in the guest room." "I'd rather go home tonight," I said firmly. "I have plans tomorrow." It was a lie, but I didn't want to stay in this house any longer than necessary. The guest room that had once been for me was now Paxton's home gym. Sheila shrugged and stepped back to her guests. I grabbed a glass of water and found a spot on the couch next to Corbin. "What's up, Mom?" he asked, keeping his eyes on his phone. "Not bad," I replied. "How's work going? You said you were waiting for a promotion." "I already did." Corbin looked away from the screen for a second. "I'm a regional sales manager now. More travel, but higher bonuses." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "I'm proud of you." Corbin nodded and went back to his phone. Our conversation was over. Dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. I sat between Veronica and one of Paxton's colleagues, who kept talking about his new Porsche and his trip to the Maldives. Sheila and Paxton sat at the head of the table, Althea next to her son. They discussed politics, investments, real estate in Palm Springs, topics I didn't understand much about. When the conversation turned to the upcoming election, I dared to speak my mind about the candidate I was supporting. Paxton smiled indulgently. "Maris, this candidate doesn't stand a chance. His program is economically unsustainable." "I think his positions on social issues are very important," I countered, "especially on affordable health care." "Typical working-class position," Althea interjected. "Always thinking about benefits, not who's going to pay for them." I felt the color flood my face. "I've paid taxes for 40 years, Althea, and I'm entitled to affordable health care in my old age." "Mom, let's not talk politics," Sheila interrupted me. "It always leads to arguments." "I'm not arguing," I said. "I'm just stating my opinion." "Which is based on emotion, not fact," Paxton added. I was silent, realizing that anything I said would be taken as the uneducated mumbling of an old woman. I spent the rest of the dinner silently picking at my plate of some exquisite dish I couldn't pronounce. After dessert, Paxton stood up and tapped his glass with his spoon. "We have a little announcement to make," he said, looking at Sheila with a smile. "We've accepted an offer of partnership in the international law firm of Baker and Halstead. It means we're moving to London for 3 years." There were enthusiastic cheers and applause. Althea glared. Corbin raised his glass in a toast. I sat stunned by the news. London? So far away? I wouldn't see my granddaughter again? "What about Olivia?" I asked when the first wave of congratulations died down. "Her school, her friends?" "There are wonderful international schools in London," Sheila said. "Althea has already helped us choose the right one, and it will be a great experience for Olivia to learn a new language, to experience a new culture." "But English is her first language," I said, my voice shaking. "English is different in England, Mom," Sheila rolled her eyes. "And I was talking about culture in general. A European education would give her an advantage in the future." "When are you leaving?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "In 2 months," Paxton answered. "Right after Christmas. We want Olivia to start the spring semester there. 2 months. I only had 2 months to say goodbye to my granddaughter." I felt tears coming to my eyes, but I held back. I didn't want to give them any reason to think I was manipulating their feelings. "Congratulations," I said, trying to smile. "This is a big opportunity for you." Sheila nodded, clearly surprised by my restrained reaction. Maybe she was expecting hysterics, tears, demands to stay. But I'd long ago realized that my wishes meant nothing to my children. The rest of the evening was spent talking about London, about prestigious neighborhoods to live in, about private clubs to which Paxton had already been promised membership. No one asked how I would manage on my own, how I would see my granddaughter, whether I would ever be able to visit them on my modest pension. I left as soon as it was decently possible, citing fatigue. Sheila walked me to the door. "Mom, I was wondering," she began, lowering her voice. "Could you keep an eye on our house while we're in London? Come once a week, check the mail, water the plants. We'll hire a gardener and a cleaning service, but we need someone to come inside once in a while. That's it. That's what this dinner invitation was for. They need a free house sitter." "Sheila, it's an hour's drive from my house to yours," I reminded her. "I'm 67 years old, and I'm not sure I can make it every week, especially in the winter." "But you're retired," she countered. "You have plenty of free time." "I have a life, Sheila," I said, surprised at my own firmness. "And a house to look after." "Okay," she pursed her lips. "I thought you'd be happy to help. After all, it would give you an excuse to be in a decent neighborhood." I didn't respond to that, just said goodbye and walked out into the rain, which by then had turned into a torrential downpour. All the way home, I thought about how easily my children had decided to cut me out of their lives. 3 years in London. Olivia is 12 now. When they get back, she'll be 15. A critical age when girls especially need support. What if they decide to stay there for good? What if I never see my granddaughter again? At home, I sat in the dark, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. It was leaking in some places, so I set out buckets to collect the water. This house, my and Edsel's pride, was slowly crumbling, just like my family. I couldn't sleep and decided to have some tea. On the kitchen table were bills for electricity, for water, for property tax. The amount of tax was impressive. The area where the villa was located was considered prestigious, and the taxes were increasing every year. My pension barely covered all the expenses. I looked out the window at the dark garden that had once been my and Edsel's pride. Now it was overgrown, many of the plants dead without proper care. I didn't have the strength or the means to keep it in order. Suddenly it hit me. Why am I clinging to this house? It's too big for one old woman, too expensive to maintain, too full of ghosts of the past. Why am I barely making ends meet every month when I could sell the villa, buy something smaller, and live comfortably with the money I have left? The thought was so simple, so obvious, I wondered why I hadn't come to it sooner. Sure, there were memories in this house, but aren't memories always with me in my heart? And this house. It was a symbol of my past, my marriage, my life with my children. But that life is over. Edsel is gone. The children are grown and estranged from me. Maybe it's time to start a new chapter. I stayed up all night pondering this decision. By morning, I was sure I'd sell the villa. I would buy something smaller, maybe closer to the coast, like Edsel and I had always dreamed of. I would live the way I wanted to live, not the way my children or society expected me to live. In the morning, I called the real estate agency and made an appointment with an agent. The woman on the other end of the line sounded surprised when I described my house and neighborhood, but quickly agreed to come in for an appraisal. I spent the next 2 days getting the house as cleaned up as I could. I realized that the condition of the house would determine its price, and I wanted to get the highest amount possible. At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, a shiny black Lexus pulled up at my gate. A woman in her 40s in a smart suit got out. Lauren Miller, a real estate agent. "Mrs. Wimbrel?" She extended her hand for a handshake. "Nice to meet you. Let's take a look at your house." We walked around the villa room by room. Lauren took notes, took pictures, asked questions about the utilities, the age of the roof, the heating system. I was honest about all the problems: leaky roof, old electrical wiring, plumbing problems. "The house needs serious repairs," she said when we finished the inspection and sat down in the living room. "But the plot is very valuable, and the villa itself has architectural value. It was built in the 30s, right?" 38, I nodded. "My husband and I bought it 20 years ago and renovated it. But a lot of things have gotten old since then." "I think we can put a good price on it," Lauren said, looking over her notes. "A lot of buyers are looking for homes with history and character. They're willing to invest in renovations to get a unique home." She quoted an amount that made me blink with surprise. It was much more than I had expected. "Are you sure?" I asked. The house is in this condition. The real estate market is booming, Lauren explained, especially in neighborhoods like yours. I wouldn't be surprised if we got more than that. We discussed the details, the agency's commission, the time frame, the necessary documents. Lauren suggested we start showing in a week, as soon as the professional photos and virtual tour were ready. Do you already have plans for where you will move? She asked, gathering her things. I'm thinking of something smaller, maybe closer to the ocean, I replied. I've always wanted to live by the sea. We have some great options in Carlsbad and Oceanside, Lauren perked up. Small condos with ocean views, perfect for one person. And there are great retirement communities there, lots of activities, socializing. We agreed that she would email me some options. When Lauren left, I sat on the porch and looked at my garden for a long time. The decision had been made, and in a strange way, I felt not sadness, but relief. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. In the evening, I received a call from Dorcas Tyndall, an old friend whom I had not seen for almost a year. We had met when we worked together, I at the post office, she at the library next door. Every day we had lunch together in the little cafe between our establishments. Dorcas was unmarried, never had children, and always said it was her conscious choice. Maris? She exclaimed into the phone. How are you? It's been so long since I've heard your voice. Dorcas! I felt a smile appear on my face. I was just thinking about you the other day. Nothing bad, I hope, she laughed. Only good things, I assured her. How are you? How's your traveling? Dorcas had just returned from a cruise in the Mediterranean. After she retired, she decided to fulfill her dream and see the world. Every year she took a new trip: Europe, Asia, South America. She sent me postcards from each place, and I kept them in a special box. Splendid, she replied enthusiastically. Venice is beautiful, even with tourists. And the Greek islands? Maris, you must see them. Such blue sea, such light. Sounds wonderful, I said, feeling a slight prick of envy. What's new with you? How are the children, the grandchildren? I told her about Olivia's birthday, about Sheila's words, about moving to London, and my decision to sell the villa. Well done, Dorcas exclaimed. It's about time. You've lived for others too long, Maris. It's time to think of yourself. Do you really think so? I asked, surprised by her reaction. I was afraid you'd say I was crazy. Crazy? On the contrary. You've finally come to your senses. Dorcas always spoke bluntly. Do you know what I've been thinking all these years? That you've wasted your life on people who don't appreciate you, your children. I'm sorry, but they're selfish. They take and take without giving anything in return. They're my children, Dorcas, I said weakly. So what? That doesn't give them the right to treat you like a doormat. You deserve better, Maris. You always have. We talked for nearly an hour. Dorcas talked about her travels, the new friends she'd made on the cruise, her plans for the future. Listen, she said, why don't you come with me next time? I'm planning a cruise to the Caribbean in March. 2 weeks of sun, sea, and great food. Staterooms are cheap if you book in advance. I don't know, Dorcas, I hesitated. I've never been on a cruise before. You'll try it, she wouldn't back down. Life is too short to postpone the pleasures of life. Who knows how long we have left? 10 years? 15? We need to make the most of them. I was beginning to find the idea more and more appealing. Why not? If I sold the villa, I'd have money. I've always dreamed of seeing the world, but I've put those dreams on hold for my family, for my children. Maybe it's time to realize them. You know what? I said firmly. I'll come with you, as soon as I sell the house and get settled in. Good, Dorcas exclaimed. We'll have so much fun. You won't regret it, I promise. After I talked to Dorcas, I couldn't sleep for a long time. My mind was filled with plans, ideas, dreams. I imagined myself in a small but cozy apartment overlooking the ocean. I imagined waking up in the morning and going to the beach to watch the sunrise, going on a road trip with Dorcas photographing the sunset over the Caribbean Sea. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive, full of hope and expectation. It was as if the heavy curtains separating me from the future had suddenly lifted, and I saw that what lay ahead was not emptiness and loneliness, but new possibilities, new horizons. Yes, I will miss my granddaughter. Yes, it will hurt me to think of my children turning their backs on me. but I will no longer live in the past. I deserve happiness. I deserve respect. And if I can't get it from my children, I will find it elsewhere, in new friends, in new hobbies, in new places. The next morning, I called Lauren and told her I was ready to start the sales process as soon as possible. Then I opened my laptop and started researching housing options in coastal towns. Carlsbad, Oceanside, Del Mar. The names sounded like music, promising new life, new opportunities. Was it scary? Yes. I spent 20 years in that house, knew every creak, every crack. Edsel's last years were here. My children grew up here. I was happy here. But I knew I couldn't live in the past forever. You have to move forward, even if it's scary, even if you don't know what lies ahead. I decided not to tell the kids about my decision yet. I knew they would object, ask questions, maybe even try to talk me out of it. Not because they cared about my well-being, but because it would disrupt their plans. Perhaps they were already counting on inheriting this house after my death, or to use it in some other way to their advantage. But it was my home, my decision, my life, and I wasn't going to live by anyone else's rules anymore. It's been 2 weeks since I made the decision to sell the villa. Lauren Miller turned out to be a true professional. She organized a professional photo shoot, created a virtual tour of the house, and placed an ad on all major real estate websites. Despite the problems with the house, interest was high. The location of the villa and the plot itself attracted potential buyers. In the meantime, I looked at several options in coastal towns and even traveled to Carlsbad to see a condominium that caught my eye. It was a small but bright and cozy senior complex, just a 10-minute walk from the ocean. There was a community garden, a pool, and a recreation room where residents could gather for games and activities. I met a few future neighbors. They seemed like nice people. Many, like me, had moved there after retirement to enjoy the proximity to the ocean. I still hadn't told my kids about my decision, partly for fear of their reaction, partly because I wanted to wait for a concrete offer on the house. I didn't have to report to them, but I knew that sooner or later I would have to let them know my plans. Fate had decided everything for me. Thursday morning, while I was having breakfast on the terrace, the phone rang. It was Sheila, her voice sounding tense. "Mom, is it true?" she asked without greeting. "Is what true, dear?" I asked, even though I already knew what it was about. "That you're selling the house." There was so much coldness in her voice that I could almost physically feel it through the tube. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. So they already knew. But how? "Yes, Sheila, I've decided to sell the villa," I answered calmly. "It's too big for me alone, and it's getting harder and harder to maintain." "And you weren't going to tell us?" She was indignant. "Were we supposed to find out from Amelia Holt that our mother had put the family home up for sale?" Amelia Holt was the wife of Jeremy Holt, a colleague of Paxton's whom I'd met at that ill-fated dinner. Apparently, she saw an ad for the house. "I was going to tell you when there was an offer," I said. "For now, I'm just researching the market." "Researching the market?" I could hear the sarcasm in her voice. "Mom, the websites have pictures of the house, a virtual tour, and the price. That's not market research. That's actively selling." "Sheila, it's my house and I have the right to decide what to do with it," I said firmly. "Corbin and I are on our way to your place," she said sharply. "We'll be there in 2 hours." She hung up without waiting for my answer. I sat staring at the phone in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. I expected the conversation to be difficult, but I didn't think it would start so suddenly and aggressively. I spent 2 hours nervously waiting, going over the arguments in my head, preparing myself for the children's possible objections. This was my house, my decision. I didn't have to make excuses, and yet I felt guilty, like I'd done something wrong. Exactly 2 hours later, a klaxon sounded at the gate. I walked out onto the porch and saw Sheila's big black SUV parked out front. Sheila and Corbin got out of it, both with grim faces. Following them, to my surprise, was Althea. What was she doing here? What did my mother-in-law have to do with my decisions? "Mom," Sheila came up to me, her face tense. "We need to have a serious talk." I nodded silently and led them into the house. We were in the living room, Sheila and Corbin on the couch, Althea in the chair, me across from them. "Why did you bring Althea?" I asked, looking at my sister-in-law. "Althea is very concerned about you, Mom. Sheila replied. She is concerned for your well-being. I held back a chuckle. Althea had never been concerned for my well-being. Her presence here had some other reason. And what exactly is it that bothers you? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Your mental state, Mom, Corbin interjected. You're making rash decisions that could negatively affect your future. My mental state is perfectly fine, I replied. And my decision to sell the house is very well thought out. Mom, Sheila leaned forward, her voice softer, as if she were speaking to a child or a sick person. We understand that Dad's death has been hard on you. Maybe you're feeling lonely, and that's affecting your decisions. But selling the house is too drastic a step. I don't feel lonely, I countered. And my decision has nothing to do with your father's death. It's a practical decision. The house is too big for me, too expensive to maintain. I want something smaller, more comfortable, and closer to the ocean. The ocean? Corbin exchanged glances with Sheila. You're going to move to the ocean? Where exactly? To Carlsbad, I answered. I've got my eye on a condominium in a senior complex. It's very cozy, and it's only a 10-minute walk to the beach. A condominium in a senior complex? Sheila made it sound like I said I was moving to the slums. Mom, you can't be serious. You want to trade the villa for some old people's apartment? I'm 67, Sheila, I reminded her. I'm an old man myself. And yes, I prefer the old people's place to this big empty house where all I do is reminisce about the past. And what about us? Corbin asked. Have you thought about us? About how often we'll be able to see each other if you move so far away? I looked at him puzzled. When was the last time he'd come to visit me? 6 months ago? 8? Corbin, we don't see each other much anyway, I said softly. And Carlsbad is only an hour from San Bernardino. It's not another country. What about Olivia? Sheila intervened. Have you thought about your granddaughter? How she'll feel when she finds out her grandmother sold the house where she spent so many happy moments. It was a low blow. I felt anger rising in my chest. Sheila, you and Olivia are moving to London for 3 years, I reminded her. When you get back, she'll be 15. I don't think she'll be visiting her grandmother much at that age, no matter where I live. We can change our minds, Sheila said quickly. Paxton hasn't signed the final contract yet. We could stay here, be closer to you. I looked at her in surprise. She was so excited about the prospect of moving to London, so proud of Paxton's new position. And suddenly she was ready to give it all up? Something didn't add up. Sheila, I know how much this move means to you, I said. And I don't want you to give up this opportunity because of me. It's not just that, Mom, Corbin interjected. There's a financial side to it, too. Financially? I looked at him puzzled. What do my finances have to do with you? We don't think you realize the full value of the house, Althea said, entering the conversation for the first time. This neighborhood has become very prestigious in recent years. The land here is worth a fortune. If you sell the house now, you may not get its full market value. Lauren Miller, my real estate agent, did a thorough appraisal, I replied. And I'm quite happy with the price offered. Lauren Miller? Althea raised an eyebrow. Maris, she's known for selling properties quickly, but not always for the best price. You should have consulted us before choosing an agent. I don't have to consult you about my property, I said firmly, starting to lose patience. Mom, please. Sheila stood up suddenly and walked over to me, kneeling down next to my chair. Tears glistened in her eyes. Please don't sell the villa. You don't realize how important it is to us. I looked at her with bewilderment. Why was selling my house so important to her? Something was definitely not right. Sheila, what are you talking about? I asked. Why do you care so much about what I do with my house? Sheila lowered her eyes, avoiding my gaze. Corbin was nervously rubbing the cuff of his shirt. Althea stared out the window with an impenetrable expression. Sheila, I repeated insistently. What's going on? Sheila hesitated, then took a deep breath and continued. We were counting on this house, Mom, that one day it would be ours. You were counting on inheriting my house? I said slowly, feeling the anger building inside me. Had you already planned what you would do with my property after I died? Not after you die, Sheila countered quickly. We thought that when you were older and couldn't live on your own, you would move in with us or to a good nursing home, and the villa could be sold or rented out. A nursing home? I couldn't believe my ears. You've already put me in a nursing home and disposed of my assets. Mom, don't be so dramatic, Corbin interjected. We were just planning for the future, like any responsible family. Responsible family, I repeated, shaking my head. A responsible family asks their mother's opinion about her future, not decides everything behind her back. We wanted to talk to you, Sheila said, but we couldn't find the right moment. And now you found the right time because I've interfered with your plans. I grinned bitterly. Because I dared to use my property as I saw fit. Sheila rose from her knees and sat down on the couch next to Corbin again. Her face had changed. The mask of care and concern was gone, giving way to the calculating expression I'd seen so often in recent years. Mom Paxton and I took out a loan against our future inheritance, she finally admitted. We expected to be able to pay it off when we inherited the house. I felt the blood rush from my face. They took out a loan against a house they didn't even own? Against my house? You did what? I exhaled. How is that even possible? There are special financial instruments, Althea intervened. Loans against a future inheritance are legal if there are reasonable grounds to believe that the inheritance will be substantial. And you certainly had such reasons, I said, looking at her. You were so sure that I would leave the house to Sheila and Corbin that you advised them to take out a loan against it. I only pointed out the possibility, Althea replied coldly. It was their decision. Mom, understand, Sheila leaned forward. We didn't do anything wrong. We just used the resources we had. Resources? I couldn't believe my ears. I'm a resource to you? My life? My home are just resources for your financial fraud? Don't twist my words, Mom, Corbin interjected. That's not what we meant. What did you mean? I asked, feeling my voice shake. Explain to me what you meant when you decided to dispose of my house without my knowledge. We thought you'd be happy to help us, Sheila said. You always said you'd do anything for us. Help you? I couldn't believe my ears. Sheila, you and Paxton have a combined income 6 times my pension. You have a huge house in an upscale neighborhood, 2 cars, vacations 3 times a year. And you need help? We have a certain lifestyle to maintain, Althea interjected, especially now that Paxton has been promoted. In London, you'll need to rent a decent place to live, pay for Olivia's private school, participate in social life at an appropriate level. And for that, you've decided to mortgage my house, I said slowly, starting to get the big picture. The house that Edsel and I had bought with our savings, that we'd been paying the mortgage on for 20 years, denying ourselves everything. You decided that it belonged to you, that you could use it to support your lifestyle. Mom, we didn't take that much, Sheila tried to justify herself. Only $200,000. $200,000? I felt my breath catch. What did you spend it on? Sheila and Corbin exchanged glances. Althea sighed. Paxton wanted to join a prestigious golf club, Sheila finally said. And we needed to update the kitchen before we sold the house. And Corbin needed money to invest. An investment? I turned to my son. Yes, Mom, Corbin tried to smile. I found a great opportunity to invest in a startup. They're developing a fitness app that will use artificial intelligence. That's the future. I looked at my children, not recognizing them. These people that I gave birth to, raised, gave my whole life to, were sitting in front of me telling me how they mortgaged my house for a golf club and questionable investments. And now you're afraid you won't be able to repay the loan if I sell the house, I said slowly, putting the pieces of the mosaic together. The bank might demand immediate repayment if it knew the house was sold. Sheila nodded. We don't have that kind of money right now, especially with the move coming up. Mom, please, Corbin stood up and walked over to me. We're asking you not to do this. At least wait a few years. I'm sure my investment will pay off and we'll be able to pay off the loan. I looked at him, at his pleading eyes, at his expensive watch, which was probably also bought with the money from the loan against my house. And suddenly, it hit me. That's why you offered to look after your house while you were in London, I said, looking at Sheila. Not because you needed my help, but because you wanted to make sure I wouldn't sell the house while you were gone. Sheila lowered her eyes, not in denial. And that's why you've kept me at a distance all these years, I continued, feeling the anger building up inside. You didn't call, you didn't visit, you weren't interested in my life. You were afraid I'd find out what you were planning, that you'd already taken over my house. Mom, we love you, Sheila tried to object. We've just been very busy. We have our own lives. Don't you dare talk to me about love. I stood up, feeling my knees shake. Love isn't about using a man as a resource. Love is not planning his future without his input. Love is not lying and manipulation. Maris, calm down, Althea intervened. You're overreacting emotionally. The children were just trying to secure their future. At my expense, I cut her off. At the expense of my comfort, my safety, my future. Mom, please. Sheila suddenly dropped to her knees and grabbed my hands, her face contorted with fear. Please don't sell the villa. No, don't sell the villa. We won't be able to pay the loan. The bank will take our house. We'll lose everything. I looked at her, this woman who was once my little girl. She was crying, begging, but I saw in her eyes not remorse, but fear. Fear of losing her status, her way of life, her position in society. I looked at Sheila kneeling in front of me. Her perfectly made-up face was contorted with fear, her hands trembling. Corbin stood next to her, his usually confident expression replaced with panic. Althea sat upright, but even her impenetrable mask was beginning to crack, worry in her eyes. All my life I've yielded. I've yielded to my husband when he insisted. I gave in to my children when they demanded expensive toys or fancy clothes. I gave in at work, agreeing to extra shifts so others could spend time with their families. I've always believed that giving in is loving, caring, and being a good person. But now, looking at my children, I suddenly realized that my giving in had not made anyone happy. Edsel died without realizing many of his dreams. The children had grown up selfish and calculating. And me? I lost myself in this endless stream of give and take. Stand up, Sheila, I said calmly. Don't humiliate yourself. She rose slowly, wiping away her tears. Mom, please, she began again. No, I held up my hand, stopping her. It's my turn to speak, and you will all listen. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. So much had accumulated over the years, so many resentments, disappointments, misunderstandings. Where do I start? When you and Corbin were little, I began, looking at Sheila. I lived for you. Every decision I made, every move I made, was made with your best interests in mind. Your father and I gave up everything to give you the best education, the best opportunities in life, and I don't regret it. It's the role of parents to make sacrifices for their children. I paused, feeling a heaviness building in my chest. But I expected that when you grew up and became independent, successful people, our relationship would change. That you would treat me with the same respect and care I showed you. That we would become not just mother and children, but friends, a support for each other. I looked at their faces, incomprehension, impatience, fear, but not remorse, not guilt. Instead, as soon as you got back on your feet, you began to drift apart. At first imperceptibly, less calls, less visits. Then more and more clearly, missing family holidays, forgetting my birthdays. When your father died, you were there physically, but not emotionally. You organized the funeral as a business event, not as a farewell to the man who gave you life. Mom, we were in shock, Corbin tried to object. We didn't know how to react. Don't interrupt me. I gave him a look that silenced him immediately. After your father died, I was left alone in this big house. I'd hoped that you'd come more often, that Olivia would spend weekends with me, that we'd grow closer. Instead, you've become even more distant. I haven't seen my granddaughter in months. You, Corbin, didn't call me last Christmas. And you, Sheila, forgot my birthday last year. We had a crazy week at work, Sheila mumbled. I was going to call, but something more important always came up, I finished for her. Always something more important than your mother. I got up and went to the window. It overlooked a garden that had once been manicured and blooming, but was now overgrown with weeds. I could forgive your estrangement, I continued, looking out the window. I could understand that you have your own life, your own worries. But what I've learned today, that you mortgaged my house, that you disposed of it as your property without a word to me. That is a betrayal I cannot forgive. I turned to them. They sat in silence, not looking at me. I'm selling the villa, I said firmly, and nothing will make me change that decision. But Mom, Sheila started to cry again, we'll lose everything. The bank will take our house. We won't be able to move to London. That's your problem, Sheila, I said. You are adults who made the decision to take out a loan against someone else's property. Now you have to take responsibility for your actions. But it will ruin our lives, Corbin exclaimed. All my investments, all my plans. Have you thought about my life? I asked, looking him straight in the eye. How I'll live in my old age? What will happen to me if the house becomes uninhabitable? That I too have a right to happiness, to comfort, to fulfill my dreams? They were silent, and that silence was more eloquent than any words. I thought you loved me, I continued quietly. But today I realize that you only love what I can give you. My house, my money, my care, but not me. That's not true, Mother, Sheila tried to object. We love you. No, Sheila, love isn't words, it's actions. And your actions over the years have shown me to be nothing more than a convenient resource for you to use when you need to and forget when you don't. I walked over to the couch and picked up my bag, the same one they'd mocked for being off-brand. I want you to leave, I said calmly. All three of you, and I don't want to see you in this house again. Maris, you can't just kick your children out like that, Althea intervened. It's unseemly. Indecent. I looked at her puzzled. It's unseemly to mortgage someone else's house without the owner's knowledge. It's unseemly to manipulate an old woman to get her property. It's unseemly to use your own mother as an ATM machine. That's what's really unseemly, Althea. I went to the door and opened it, unequivocally showing that the conversation was over. Mom, please, let's talk. Sheila took a step toward me. We can find a solution. A solution has already been found, I replied. I'm selling the house and starting a new life, without you. They walked slowly toward the exit, still not believing that I was really kicking them out. At the door, Corbin turned around. You're going to regret this, Mom, he said. When you're all alone, you'll realize that family is the most important thing. I gave him a long look. I'm already alone, Corbin. I have been for years, and you know what? It's better to be alone than with people who don't respect you. I closed the door behind them and leaned my back against it, feeling my knees shake. What had I done? Kicked my own children out, refused to help them in their time of need. Had I done the right thing? But then I remembered their faces, not regret for hurting me, but fear of losing their material possessions. They weren't asking for forgiveness. They were demanding that I sacrifice my future for their comfort, like they had always done. No, I did the right thing. For the first time in years, I put myself first, and it was the right thing to do. The next day, I called Lauren and told her I was ready to accept the offer she'd gotten from a couple from San Francisco. They were offering a little less than the asking price, but were willing to buy the house in its current condition, with no renovation requirements. Are you sure, Maris? Lauren asked. We could wait for other offers. I'm sure, I replied. The sooner the better. The sale process took a little over a month. I hadn't seen my children once, although Sheila had called several times trying to change my mind. Each time I was firm. The decision had been made, and it was final. Corbin sent me a letter written on expensive paper where he spoke in florid terms about my moral responsibility to my family and how I was destroying the future of my children and grandchildren. I didn't respond. Olivia called one evening, her voice sounding confused. Grandma, is it true you're selling the house? She asked. Mommy cries every day. Yes, dear, it's true, I replied softly. Sometimes adults have to make tough decisions. But Mommy says you're doing it out of spite to punish them, Olivia said. Your mom is upset, and I understand that, I replied. But I'm not doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because I want a different life, in a house I can afford to keep, closer to the ocean I've always loved. I can't come visit you? I could hear the worry in her voice. Of course you can, I assured her. When you come back from London, you can always come to me. I'll have a room for you. You promise? I promise. After that conversation, I felt a heavy weight on my heart. Olivia was not to blame for her parents' actions, but deep down, I knew that Sheila would do anything to turn her daughter against me, and that I would probably never see my granddaughter again. The day the sale papers were signed, I woke up at first light. The house was almost empty, most of the furniture I'd sold at a garage sale, leaving only what I was going to take with me to my new apartment. A bed, Edsel's favorite chair, a few bookshelves, and a dresser. I walked through each room, saying goodbye to the house that had witnessed so much of my life. This was where Sheila had gotten ready for prom. This was where Corbin had celebrated going to college. And this was where Edsel and I had met our silver wedding. But along with the nostalgia, I felt relief. This house had become less of a refuge for me than a burden in recent years. Too big, too expensive to maintain, too full of ghosts of the past. At the notary's office, I signed all the necessary documents and received a check for an amount that seemed almost unreal. Never in my life had I had so much money. "Congratulations, Maris," Lauren said, shaking my hand. "Now you can start a new chapter of your life." The new chapter began with the move to Carlsbad. The condo I chose was exactly as I'd dreamed, bright, cozy, with a small east-facing balcony where I could watch the sun rise over the horizon. The complex was called Dream Coast and consisted of 30 apartments arranged around a small courtyard with a garden and a fountain. Most of the residents were retirees like me, although there were a few young couples and singles. On my first day, I met the neighbor across the hall, Elizabeth Pryor, a former English teacher who had moved here after her husband died. "Are you new here?" she asked when she saw me unloading my things from the car. "Let me help you." We got to talking, and I learned that Elizabeth had lived here for 5 years and loved it. "It's a great community here," she said. "People are friendly, always willing to help. We have a book club, yoga classes on the beach, movie nights. You won't be bored." In the first few weeks, I was busy setting up the apartment. I bought new furniture for the living room, hung curtains, put up pictures, but only the ones of Edsel and me or me alone. I left the pictures of the children in a box in the pantry. Gradually, I began to get to know the other residents of the complex. Elizabeth introduced me to members of the book club that met every Wednesday in the common room. There I met Margaret, a former nurse, John, a retired naval officer, Helen, an artist, and many others. To my surprise, I quickly found common ground with these people. They had different backgrounds, experiences, and outlooks on life, but they all had one thing in common: a desire to enjoy life here and now, without putting off joy for later. I especially bonded with Helen. She was about my age but looked younger, perhaps because of her energy and enthusiasm. Helen ran a painting class on the beach twice a week, and she convinced me to join, even though I assured her I had never had a talent for art. "Talent is a myth," she said, waving her brush. "It's all about practice and seeing the world in your own way. Everyone can learn to paint if they really want to." With her guidance, I began to paint, tentatively at first, then more and more boldly. To my surprise, I enjoyed it immensely. I could sit on the beach for hours trying to capture the play of light on the waves or the flight of seagulls over the horizon. One day, as Helen and I were returning from class, she asked me about my family. "Do you have children? Grandchildren?" I told her my story briefly, about Sheila and Corbin, how they drifted away from me, the latest conflict over the sale of the house. "I haven't talked to them in 3 months," I finished. "And, I don't miss them as much as I thought I would." "That's normal," Helen nodded. "When a relationship becomes toxic, it's best to step aside, even if it's family. I haven't spoken to my brother in 10 years, and it was the best decision for my mental health. Her understanding and support meant more to me than I could put into words." Dorcas came to visit me a month after I moved in. She marveled at my new apartment, my ocean view, my new friends. "You look happy, Maris," she said as we sat on my balcony drinking wine and watching the sunset. "I haven't seen you this calm in a long time." "I feel happy too," I admitted. "For the first time in many years, I am living the life I want, not the life others expect of me." "And the children? Have they come to terms with your decision?" I shook my head. "I don't know. We don't talk to each other." Sheila called a few times in the first few weeks, but then she stopped. Corbin sent me a letter full of recriminations. I didn't write back. Don't you miss them? I wondered. Did I miss them? Sure, there were times when I remembered them as children, laughing, loving, innocent. But those children had long since grown up and turned into people I barely recognized. I miss the children they were, I finally answered, but not the adults they've become. And that's okay. Dorcas squeezed my hand. You don't have to love those who hurt you, even if they are your children. We decided to put our plan into action and go on a cruise to the Caribbean in March. I bought new summer dresses, a straw hat, sunglasses, things I had previously considered unnecessary luxuries. Week after week, month after month, I built my new life. In the morning, I would wake up with the sunrise and go to the beach, sometimes alone, sometimes with Elizabeth or other neighbors. We would do yoga right on the sand, then swim in the ocean, weather permitting. In the afternoons, I often painted or read books I always wanted to read but never found the time. Evenings were spent in various activities: book club, movie nights, dinners with new friends. On weekends, Helen and I would sometimes drive to neighboring towns, exploring small stores, sampling the food at local restaurants, visiting art galleries. Once we even went to San Diego to see an impressionist exhibition. The money from the sale of the villa was invested on the advice of a financial advisor recommended by Elizabeth. I put some of it in an account for everyday expenses, some in an account for travel and special occasions, and the rest was invested in conservative but reliable instruments that provided a steady income. For the first time in my life, I didn't worry about money. I could afford new clothes, good groceries, dinner at a restaurant without constantly checking my account balance. It was a strange but pleasant feeling, freedom from financial worries. Sometimes I thought about Sheila and Corbin, about how they dealt with the consequences of my decision. Had they been able to pay off the loan? Did they have to give up moving to London? Had they lost their home? But these thoughts came less and less often, crowded out by new experiences, new friendships, new interests. I wasn't angry with them. Rather, I felt sad that our relationship hadn't worked out the way I dreamed it would. But I didn't blame myself for it anymore. I had done my best as a mother. Now it was time to live for myself. I spent Christmas with my new friends. We had a holiday dinner in the common room, each bringing their own specialty. I made cookies from my grandmother's recipe, which had always been Sheila and Corbin's favorite childhood treat. That evening, when I got back to my apartment, there was a message on my answering machine from Olivia. Grandma, it's me. Her voice sounded more mature than I remembered. I just wanted to wish you a Merry Christmas. We've been in London for a month now. It's cold here, but it's beautiful. My new school is okay, but I miss my friends from the old one. My mom said I shouldn't call you, but, I miss you, Grandma. I hope you're doing well. I listened to her message over and over with a bitter lump in my throat. Poor girl, caught between warring adults. I decided to send her a letter, not an email, but a real paper letter, with pictures of my new house, the beach, my new friends. Let her know that I was thinking of her, that I loved her, that she could always come visit me whenever she wanted. In March, Dorcas and I went on a cruise as planned. 2 weeks on a huge liner traveling between the Caribbean islands: Jamaica, Barbados, St. Lucia, the Bahamas. I had never seen such vibrant colors, such turquoise water, such white sand beaches. We snorkeled among the coral reefs, sunbathed on the deck, danced at the parties that were held every night. I felt younger, more energetic, happier than I had in years. Do you know what I've noticed? Dorcas said one evening when we were sitting on the deck watching the stars. You don't slouch anymore. You used to walk a little hunched over, like you were carrying a heavy weight on your shoulders. Now you're standing up straight and there's a sparkle in your eyes. I smiled, realizing she was right. I had changed not only internally, but also externally. Regular yoga classes had improved my posture and flexibility. The sea air and sunshine made my skin healthier. My hair, which I used to just bundle up, was now cut short into a stylish hairstyle that Helen had recommended. But the main change was on the inside. I no longer felt like a victim of circumstance, a pawn in someone else's game. I became the mistress of my life, my decisions, my future. When I returned from the cruise, I plunged headlong into preparing for an exhibition of local artists, where Helen persuaded me to exhibit some of my work. I never thought my humble watercolors could interest anyone, but to my surprise, 2 paintings sold on the first day. See, Helen said triumphantly, I told you had talent. Not talent, but practice, I corrected her, remembering her own words. And a unique way of looking at the world. We laughed, and I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Helen, for Dorcas, for all the new friends who had helped me find myself anew. That evening, sitting on the balcony of my apartment and looking out at the ocean, I thought about the path I had traveled over the past year. From a woman who lived in the past and suffered the misunderstanding of her own children, to a person who enjoys the present and is optimistic about the future. Yes, I've had to let go of a lot of things. Illusions of a perfect family, hopes for a close relationship with my children, even a house that once seemed like the fulfillment of my and Edsel's dreams. But in return, I got something more precious, the freedom to be myself, to live by my own rules, to follow my dreams. Edsel would be pleased to see me now. He always said I thought too much about others and too little about myself. You deserve to be happy, Maris, he often said. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was actually happy. I don't know what the future will bring. Maybe someday Sheila and Corbin will understand my motives and try to repair their relationship. Maybe Olivia will want to get to know her grandmother better when she grows up. Or maybe that will never happen. But I no longer build my life around the expectations and hopes associated with other people. I live in the here and now, savoring every sunrise, every sea breeze, every new page of a book, every brushstroke on a canvas. And you know what? It's a beautiful life. My own life at last.